creates questions the human mind cannot answer. Out of reach, past all we can see, hear, and touch, beyond all we understand, lies the extraordinary. The extraordinary is this woman's search for the family she never knew. Raised in an orphanage, Maureen Bassett was haunted by the vision of a woman with auburn hair and brown eyes.
Everywhere I went, I think, is that my mother? Maybe that's my brother. Perhaps that's my sister. And I'd look at people and you just really wondered, all these faces that were strangers, maybe one of them was my mother.
One day, a nun gave Maureen the key to her past, and fate stepped in to make a dream come true.
Finally, the door opened, and a woman just stood there with auburn hair and brown eyes.
It is the mind's apparent ability to journey across space and time. The ability to astral travel.
There are no limitations to astral projection, none whatsoever. You can just move just out of the body and stay in the room, or you can go to the moon.
A real-life journey of the mind that defies logical explanation. The extraordinary is Dallas star Linda Gray's clear and unmistakable vision of a face through the windscreen of her car.
And his hands went like this through the windshield. I thought, oh my God, what is happening? I was freaked out.
The face was that of her grandson before he was born.
And he said, happy birthday to you. And his hands went like that. And I thought, oh my God, what's happening to me?
It is the remarkable final chapter in the story of the reuniting of Jake and Jonas Mason, and the final wish to say goodbye that saw Jake Mason go to his grave fulfilled.
The reunion that Jake wanted, he had gotten, and I'm sure that he died a happy man.
The extraordinary is the leading church figure who does not believe the Loch Ness Monster is a hoax. He's seen the legendary creature with his own eyes.
I'm absolutely certain that what I saw was a monster.
Just some of the stories that lie beyond our normal understanding. Tonight on The Extraordinary.
The ongoing saga of the Loch Ness Monster a little later. Good evening, I'm Warwick Moss. Maureen Bassett was raised by nuns in an orphanage. She grew up not knowing her real family. But as the years passed, Maureen had the urge to find out who she really was. And so began one of the most amazing searches imaginable. Maureen Bassett is contented in her middle age. She's a qualified nurse and a mother with 4 grown-up children. But in moments of contemplation, looking back on her life, there are waves of darkness, a search for her identity, and maybe a small miracle. At the age of 18, Maureen felt deserted, alone. In a moment of desperation, she prayed for guidance and help to find the mother she'd lost. It was a prayer that was about to be answered in a most remarkable way. Maureen's story begins back in the 1940s. Her mother, Mary Riley, was a widow, trying to bring up 5 young children without a husband, without social security. Mary was ill, at the end of her tether. She felt she just had to get help for her youngest child, Maureen. And the only help she could find was from her priest and the nuns at the local orphanage, who agreed to take care of the baby. As she walked away from the orphanage, clutching the hand of her 4-year-old daughter, Ruth, Mary Riley tearfully remembered the priest's advice. Maureen's only a baby. Give her a chance. Think about giving her up for adoption. For 3 long years, Mary Riley agonised over the future of her family. The advice from the priest, the welfare of all 5 children, and her desperate financial position. The arguments tumbled through her mind. Finally, reluctantly, Mary made her decision. She signed the adoption papers, and at the age of 4, Maureen started a brand new life with a new name and a new family. But Maureen never abandoned hope of one day finding her natural mother, who she'd last seen when she was barely a year old, a mother she'd never really known. Even as a child in the orphanage, Maureen had dreams she couldn't explain. In them, there was always a woman with auburn hair and brown eyes, a woman who seemed to be in anguish. It was a dream that was to recur time and time again, right through to Maureen's teenage years.
I think quite often people used to show photos of when they were little and of their brothers and sisters, and I never had any photos of when I was little. So I suppose deep down I had this yearning to search to find out if I really did have brothers and sisters, and maybe, I think at 18, we just feel that way quite often, that we want to know, search for the roots of our life.
That search for her roots took 18-year-old Maureen back to St Catherine's Orphanage in Geelong, where she'd spent the first years of her life. And there she met Sister Aquitaine, one of the nuns who'd cared for her as a child.
When we were talking, I said to her I had a feeling that I had brothers and sisters, and I said I often used to have a dream of a woman with auburn hair and brown eyes, and she used to often have a face of anguish. And she said, "Do you think it's your mother?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really sure if it is or not." And then she said, "Would you like to know who your mother is?" And I said, "I really would love to know who my mother was."
At the time, it probably wasn't a done thing, but Sister Aquitaine felt she had to help Maureen. On the back of a holy picture, she carefully wrote down 4 names: Patricia Margaret, Peter Kevin, Ruth Pauline, and Kathleen Valerie, Maureen's sisters and her brother. The nun also passed on the key to Maureen's quest, the name Mary Riley, and a suburb of Melbourne, where maybe she could be found.
It was the most wonderful feeling just to know I had brothers and sisters and possibly a mother alive. I realised my father had died, but just the thought of seeing my mother again would be wonderful. And even when I went back into Melbourne, everywhere I went I stopped to have tea on the way home, and I think, is that my mother? Maybe that's my brother. Perhaps that's my sister. And I'd look at people and you just really wondered, all these faces that were strangers, maybe one of them was my mother.
For days, Maureen tried to track down the family that she'd been parted from for 17 years. In particular, the woman of her dreams, the woman with auburn hair and brown eyes.
I went to the police, I looked up electoral rolls, I looked up the telephone book. I think I rang up every Riley in the book. I just searched and searched, and in the end I decided I would just have a talk to God.
Thinking back now, Maureen has no idea why she chose St Joseph's in the Melbourne suburb of Northcote. Perhaps it just happened to be close by. Perhaps there was some other reason.
And I just said, "God, please would you help me find my mother? It would mean the world to me." And I just thanked him as I walked out. And then I crossed the road, I walked down the road, and then there was a crowd of people, and there was just one woman in the crowd, and I felt so compelled to ask her, and I thought, oh, this is ridiculous. And then in the end I thought, no, and I went up to her, and I said, "Do you know of a family called Riley living in this area?" She said, "Not Ruth." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I went to school with her."
Ruth, Maureen's sister, the little girl who'd been with Mary Riley when she parted with her baby daughter at the orphanage all those years before.
And in the end I said, "You don't know where they live, do you?" And she said, well, yes. She said, she lives right near here somewhere. And she looked up at the sign and she said, would you believe you're standing on the very corner of the street?
So by chance, or as Maureen believes by divine intervention, here was the breakthrough she'd been looking for all her life.
East Administration. Oh, wow. Thank you. I might try it. Good luck.
You can imagine the excitement as the 18-year-old set off to meet the young woman she thought was her long-lost sister Ruth. As she headed off down the street, Maureen was convinced that after seeing Ruth, surely finding her mother was just one more step away.
I was feeling very nervous, very, very nervous. And there was just music playing, and she took a while to answer the door. And I just felt as though it wasn't really happening. And then finally the door opened, and a woman just stood there with auburn hair and brown eyes.
For a moment, Maureen was taken aback. The woman was middle-aged, too old to be her sister Ruth. Then the realisation began to dawn. The auburn hair, the brown eyes, the woman of her dreams.
And I said to her, are you Mrs. Riley? And she said, no, dear. She said, I used to be. She said, I'm now Mrs. Ma. And she looked at me in such a quizzical way, and she said, but who are you? And I said, I'm your daughter, Maureen. And she said, my daughter? And I said, didn't you leave a little baby? Oh, my little baby, she said, and she just hugged me and we just cried, and she hugged me really tightly and then pulled me away and looked at me as if to say, are you really there? And she said, how did you ever find me? I said, if you believe in miracles, I said, I believe one happened today. Well, she thought it was really wonderful, but she did feel terribly guilty, and I told her not to feel that way because I said, I really love you. And I said, I've been given a beautiful life on this earth, and I said, I treasure it. And I said, I've just come here to love you, not to judge you.
For Maureen and her mother, there was 17 years to recover, retrace, relive. Maureen began to learn about herself and her family. Her search had borne fruit. From that first meeting with Sister Aquitaine, where she found the names of her sisters and brothers, and her mother Mary. The recurring dream of the woman with auburn hair and brown eyes. The meeting with a total stranger who knew Ruth Riley on the very street corner where she lived. The prayers at St. Joseph's, the same church where her long-lost mother prayed regularly. The same church where she'd consecrated her second marriage.
And she said, I didn't want to give you up. She said, I couldn't even sign the papers. And she said, but when you were finally 3.5-year-old, she said the social worker came along and talked me, and she said, and I'm so angry with her because she said, I feel so sad that I did sign those papers.
Slowly, at times painfully, the Riley clan has grown closer and closer together. In the intervening years, their mother Mary has passed on. And of the 5 children, Maureen and Ruth have found they share many of their mother's qualities. Her sense of humour, her spirit, and her deep love of family.
We're both grandmothers, and all of our, Maureen and myself's children have grown up so much, and you sort of got things more in common now as we've got older that we didn't have before. You know, you've got things that you can relate to, you know, your children and each other, and you've known each other sort of for like nearly 31 years now. So yes, I'd say closer, yeah, very close.
Maureen's come a long way from that lost little girl who thought she was alone, that she'd been abandoned, the teenager who followed her dream and who found her family. But there's one final twist to this story. On the day Maureen Bassett walked down Eastman Street, Melbourne, in search of her mother, she had fate on her side. The mother she had dreamt about, Mary Riley, did not live in that house. She was simply there babysitting.
Well, then you must be my mother. What? I'm Maureen.
across time and space by mind power is called astral projection, a strange power that allows the unseen being to reach across vast distances and to travel in new dimensions. Ethereal existence, a world beyond the measurement and comprehension of this world, a timeless world of infinite space. Does it exist? Hard to know, until you hear stories like the one told the other day by Danny Marina.
There are no limitations to astral projection, none whatsoever. You can just move just out of the body and stay in the room, or you can go to the moon.
Danny Marina didn't go all the way to the moon, but she is convinced she travelled halfway across Australia to Whyalla in South Australia, without physically leaving her living room in Sydney. She believes it was a case of astral projection, an out-of-body experience. According to those who've studied the phenomenon, it's not uncommon. Anyone can do it. In fact, many of us have these experiences. We just don't recognise them. One Australian expert, hypnotherapist Jo Buchanan, says she herself has travelled to far-off places without actually leaving home.
What I would do is just relax, close my eyes and sort of put myself into a light meditation. And then I'd leave the body, and all you'd be aware of would be somebody sitting in front of you with their eyes closed, appearing to meditate, because the physical body just continues to breathe and so on, looks after itself.
Jo Buchanan believes the key to astral projection is relaxation, concentration, and focus.
Perhaps focusing on a loved one from some distance, because there's a very strong energy link or bond with loved ones. If you think of something like your mother or your daughter or something like that, or your partner who may be interstate or something like that, you can move very easily to these people. But what you do is you focus on it.
That's certainly what Sydney freelance writer and broadcaster Danny Marina did. It had been several years since she'd seen her family in South Australia, and she was missing her mother and father. As well, there was to be a reunion. Her father's brother had just arrived in Whyalla after 40 years in the United States. But Danny couldn't be there. Well, not physically. She'd read about astral projection, and one Sunday afternoon decided to see if it would work for her. To see if somehow some part of her could travel thousands of kilometres and be with the family.
Well, I don't know how to do it, but what I did that particular day was I just sat in the armchair and closed my eyes. And I remember the desire and the intent was so strong. I desperately wanted to go and visit my folks. And that's all I did. I just closed my eyes and imagined the road that I had travelled by car. That was my starting point. And then tried to fly. But I really wasn't going anywhere. And then, poof, I became a silver ball, slightly higher than myself. I remember the surprise of this happening, but I didn't want to dwell too much on it and miss the experience that was about to take place. I don't remember really going through the States. I think it was just the salt bush, and somewhere I thought, well, I've crossed Victoria and I'm now in South Australia, but I didn't see any landscape. I just appeared mysteriously, magically, in front of my parents' house.
As she glided toward the house, about a foot off the ground, Danny remembers that she noticed a blue vehicle parked in the driveway. She has no idea how long the journey from Sydney to Whyalla took. She doesn't recall any landmarks along the way. All Danny knows is that her burning desire to go home seemed to be coming true.
And I was gliding a foot higher than myself, gliding all the way down the side of the house, around the corner, and I noticed the clothesline with 2 square tablecloths on the clothesline. And I came in through the back door and saw my mother rolling pastry or something. Definitely rolling pastry. I didn't know if she was making gnocchi or strudel. I saw my father sitting at the table where he normally sits, and his brother alongside him. My father was dressed in what seemed to be a green jumper, and my uncle in a blue jumper. I noted what my mother was wearing.
Danny doesn't recall actually hearing anything, no snippets of conversation, and there was no indication that her family felt her presence in the house. But she distinctly saw things that confused her. Additions here, little changes there, particularly in her old bedroom.
And noticed floral curtains or a floral bedspread, something floral, which had never been there before. And I noticed the soap in the bathroom, which was quite unusual. I then moved from the hallway into the lounge room and looked out onto the street and saw things taking place in the yard next door and activity out on the road.
The last thing Danny remembers is that activity next door. 3 children playing in the neighbour's garden.
Suddenly I found myself back in my body, and I thought, that's extraordinary. And I went straight to the phone, rang my mother, didn't give her an introduction to my phone call, and went straight into, Mum, tell me about the blue car in the driveway. And she said, oh yes, the visitors, they just left now. I said, tell me about the 3 children on the lawn next door. Oh yes, these are the grandchildren that were visiting for the day. Well, I knew nothing about grandchildren. It had been years since I'd been home and had no idea they had grandchildren. I said, tell me about the pink soap in the bathroom. There's a strange cake of pink soap there. Oh, Uncle Benny had bought this apparently that morning.
I said, what are you talking about? I said, you dream? No, I said, I experienced something. I said, just answer my questions, he said, if it's true what I really saw it.
But for Danny's mother Anna, at home in Whyalla, that telephone conversation was to become even stranger. Next, Danny began to describe her old bedroom, which she hadn't physically entered for more than 2 years. The room with the floral patterns.
But apparently I'd got something wrong where I thought I'd seen curtains. In actual fact, I'd seen a lampshade, but at least I'd seen this floral stuff that hadn't been there when I lived there. And I said, well, tell me about the tablecloths. You have 2 square tablecloths on the line with patterns on them. Oh, yes, I buy them fresh, and she washes everything before she uses them. She just bought these new tablecloths. And I said, well, Dad's sitting there in a green jumper and Benny's alongside him in a blue jumper. Oh, no, your father has green flannelette shirt. It's not a jumper. Okay. Well, I got the colour right, but missed out on the texture of the fabric. But yes, Uncle Benny had his blue jumper.
And there was, of course, Danny's certainty that her mother was rolling pastry, making something, either gnocchi or strudel.
Yeah, so I was just doing the gnocchi. You just interrupt me to do at my lunch. You know how the men are hungry and that. Oh, and I thought, oh, that's a bit, you know, how does she see these things? And after I thought, are you all right? I just say like that, are you all right or are you crazy? And, no, she said, I'm quite all right.
And I hung up and thought, how did I do that? Yeah, it was a fantastic experience.
According to hypnotherapist Joe Buchanan, experiences like Danny's are not uncommon. Astral projection isn't a new phenomenon. It dates back to ancient Egyptian times. And in modern times, thousands of ordinary people have reported these journeys, just like Danny's.
If you become besotted with trying to do it, you become all entangled up with the whole idea of it. It's best to be very, very relaxed and perhaps take the attitude, well, I don't care whether it happens or not. The more relaxed you are, the better. But if you become a little bit too intense about it, it is difficult because you really have to relax and let go to be able to do it.
And as for Danny Marina, that one astral visit home to see her family in Whyalla has opened up a whole range of exciting possibilities for her. Possibilities she's determined to develop.
We have a fantastic tool in the mind and brain that we know very, very little about. And I believe that one day we'll come to understand that we're only using a tiny portion of it, and there's a whole new world in here that we haven't discovered yet.
For almost a decade, Linda Gray played the mistreated wife of J.R. Ewing in the TV series Dallas. Today, in real life, she's a grandmother with a very special grandchild. She saw his face before he was born.
She is not what you might expect after watching her as Sue Ellen on Dallas. Linda Gray is not the type to let a man like J.R. Ewing push her around. Not in real life. When we talked with her recently, Linda very quickly got to the point of our questions.
I'm very metaphysical. I like knowing that we were created. I like knowing there's a greater power. I like the fact knowing it's very humbling to know that you're part of the gigantic puzzle.
There was a time during the long Dallas years that she let the glare of Hollywood and her love of acting deprive her of something she now treasures, being with her children. She regrets the years she gave up to work because when Dallas ended, she says there was nothing. The experience has left her far more reflective on life, a quality she got from her own grandmother.
The presence of my grandmother is there. You know, I feel her in different instances where maybe I'm wavering a little bit, and she was fabulous. She looked like Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, this is not an attractive woman, but she had style and class, and she would like drink with the best of them, swear with the best of them. She was a real Auntie Mame. She told me about relationships once, and it was a very cool interpretation of relationships. And we were at the beach playing, and she picked up a grain of sand and she said, "Do you want to know about relationships?" And she cupped her hand and squeezed her hand like this, and all the sand came out from between her fingers. And I was like, "Yes, I see it, Grandma." And then she went like this, and she held it gently. And she said, "This is all about relationships. You hold it gently in your hand, and it won't go away." It's like, oh, okay. And I was a teenager at that time, you know. I think I was just starting to date, and she showed me that. And at the moment, I thought, what's that? What's she talking about? And it was so powerful. I mean, I never forgot that. You hold it gently. You don't squeeze it.
The one time Linda experienced a psychic vision or premonitions, she says came just before she was to become a grandmother for the first time.
I feel a presence. And the only thing that, and I've never told anyone this story before, but the vision that I did see only once, it happened to me. My daughter's due date for the baby was September 10th, and my birthday is September 12th, and that was actually her due date, sorry. And on September 10th, she called me and she said, "Mom, I'm going into labor, please come over and pack and the bags and the things." I was, okay, great, the baby's coming. And I'm driving down the freeway too fast, and I got this big smile on my face, and I started talking to my grandson, and I knew it was a him. We didn't do any of the tests. My daughter didn't do any of the tests. She wanted to be surprised. But I knew it was a he. And on the passenger's windshield, like this, like he was looking in the passenger window. And he was about 2 years old. And he looks exactly like he looks now. And his hands went like this through the windshield. I thought, oh my God, you know, what is happening? I was freaked out. And he said, "Happy birthday to you." And his hands went like that. And I thought, oh my God, what's happening to me? And I kept driving much slower. And I was like, oops, what is happening? And then I got this smile back on my face, and I looked at the vision again, and I said, "Are you coming on my birthday?" And he got this big smile, and he said, "Happy birthday to you." And it was gone, like that. I mean, that all happened in much faster than I even explained it to you. And I drove to my daughter's house, and she said, "Okay, we're ready, and I'm in labor, and da-da-da-da-da." And I said, "I don't think so." I'm sure she probably thought I had, there was something wrong with me. And I said, no, you'll probably be ready in a couple of days. So the long story very short, the labor pains ceased, and we went to the hospital in the morning of the 12th. And I was driving behind them to the hospital with this big smile on my face saying, he's coming today. And it was a he, and he was my birthday present. It was the best present. I mean, how can you top that? So that was my first and only vision, and it was a pretty powerful one.
In the American Northwest, the legendary Loch Ness Monster remains one of the world's most talked about and studied mythical creatures. A deathbed confession by one of the men involved with the most famous Nessie picture claimed that the whole thing was a hoax. But his words have served to fuel further speculation. After all, his claims only covered the most famous of the Loch Ness pictures, not the scores of others in existence. For more than 1,400 years, the sinister, murky depths of Loch Ness in Scotland have been a fertile breeding ground for one of the most famous monster stories of all time. The first sighting, in fact, dates back to 565 AD, when St. Columba is said to have seen a great creature rise to the surface of the loch and roar at him. Down through the ages, there have been thousands more sightings, one of them by another more modern man of God.
I believe I'm the only living Australian who's actually seen it without any question.
Dr. Gordon Powell is one of Australia's most respected churchmen. And like the good saint all those centuries ago, what he saw has been recorded and documented.
I can't see how it could possibly have been a hoax. There was no boat about pulling anything. It obviously wasn't a mechanised thing. It was very much alive. It was quite unlike anything I'd ever seen or even imagined. And I'm absolutely certain that what I saw was a monster.
In his distinguished career, Dr. Powell spent 30 years as a broadcaster on Australian radio. He's written 14 books and has been a guest preacher in churches all over the world. As well, Dr. Powell has had a lifelong interest in the creature that's become known as Nessie. And there's one question that's fascinated him from his student days in Scotland. Is Nessie a myth or a living, breathing monster? Maybe Dr. Powell found the answer to that question on June the 21st, 1936, as he sat writing beside the lake.
The loch was so calm that it was a big area and it was like a mirror, absolutely calm. And I was attracted by a ripple in this calm area, and then suddenly a head came out of the water and then a long neck about 2 metres long behind it. And the head was smooth like a young calf, and it turned to the left and it turned to the right. At that point it was looking directly at me, and then it looked straight ahead and I believe spotted a school of salmon and dived, and the head and neck went under, and then these great humps came up behind, and a lot of spray, a lot of foam flew about, and it made a long white wake.
He reached for his camera and managed to take a couple of snaps. But even though he was too late to capture Nessie herself on film, if you read the letter he wrote immediately afterward, the young theologian's excitement is obvious.
The pen nearly went through the paper, and I wrote, "By jings, I've seen it." And I went on to describe how I was sitting on the bank of Loch Ness writing this letter, and waiting for the monster when the jolly thing turned up, and that's the words I actually wrote.
Dr. Gordon Powell is one of the legion of Nessie followers, scientists and ordinary folk alike, who are convinced that there is a monster lurking somewhere in the loch. And for 60 years, this photograph was considered the ultimate proof that Nessie does exist. Then this year, it seems, that proof was blown out of the water when a dying man in Britain confessed the 1933 photo was a fake. The monster was, in fact, a Woolworths toy that cost a few shillings. A few shillings that might have fooled the world, but hasn't dampened the ardour of the true believers.
I think if I had to give a decision, I'd say yes, that was a hoax. But it's only one of a great many. I have a photo of two boys who came to our tent and they boasted that they'd made a monster of inner tubes and barrels, and one of them would tow it behind a boat while the other one charged American tourists sixpence a time to look at it through their telescope. All these hoaxes have, of course, upset the scientists. They hate to be caught by a hoax, and a lot of journalists are naturally pretty cynical about it, and it's very hard to get a sensible conversation going about the Loch Ness Monster. But one more hoax doesn't alter the fact that there is a Loch Ness Monster, that there is a Nessie. In fact, I believe there are several monsters like Nessie, and probably other creatures of a different species, but also very large.
And Dr. Gordon Powell obviously is not alone. Now, there are even guided tours of Loch Ness by submarine that attract the faithful, all of them anxious to join in the hunt for this elusive monster. So far, though, the search has been futile.
The submarine only does 3 miles an hour. Well, I saw Nessie can do about 30 miles an hour, and she's not going to hang around waiting for a slow boat to China.
Dr. Powell is sure he saw a creature there that summer's day in 1936. A creature that answers to the description of the Loch Ness Monster. A monster that maybe one day will surface again, be photographed, verified, and end the argument forever.
Strange things happen. In fact, extraordinary things happen.
Earlier show, we told you of the remarkable reunion of Jake and Jonas Mason, two brothers separated for 47 years. Jake had travelled halfway round the world in search of Jonas. He had not seen him since just after the Second World War. He had no idea where Jonas was, just that he was last seen in Western Australia. The story touched many hearts. People called offering money so that Jake could fulfil his last wish and make one more trip to Australia to say goodbye to his brother. He never made that trip. Jake Mason died in London on June the 17th, 1994. But as fate would have it, Jake did get the chance to talk one last time to his beloved brother, Jonas.
To me, the reunion that Jake wanted, he had gotten. And I'm sure that he died a happy man.
Jake Mason's seemingly impossible quest began in the English Midlands town of Stoke-on-Trent. In his 83rd year, with his health fading after half a lifetime's grim toil in the mines, Jake made a momentous decision.
To see me brother, no more, no less.
Armed with only this faded 50-year-old photograph of Jonas and his meagre savings, Jake arrived in Perth, Western Australia, and began the long, hard, possibly hopeless search. With his time and money running out, Jake turned to a Perth newspaper for help. And by chance, that help came in the form of Pat Murphy, who was certain that the Jonas in the story was an old swagman she'd met in the wilds of Western Australia more than 10 years before.
Told me his name was Joe, Joe Mason, and I knew he'd come from England, and I said, that's an English accent, isn't it? He said, oh yes, but many, many years ago, he said, I said, have you got any family there now? He said, no, they've all died.
Not only that, Pat Murphy had captured old Joe on film. A few scratchy seconds of celluloid that would change Jake Mason's life and allow him to die in peace.
That's bloody him! It's bloody him! I jumped a yard up in the air! Like this!
But Jake Mason's search was far from over. It seemed Jonas was alive, but in more than 40 years of travel, he'd left no tracks. There was no trace of him in any official record. Then, just hours before Jake was due to fly home to England, Pat Murphy led him to this riverside camp near Perth.
Come on, Jake. You're going to see your brother. He's coming up there. Tears, bloody hellfire. And he comes, and he was what can you say? I just simply said to him, hello, Joe, how are you? He said, hello, Jake, how are you? And I'm crying like a bloody baby.
After that reunion, Jonas resumed his life on the road, camping out, living off the land. No doubt, in his hours of solitude, he thought of his few short days together with Jake and the vow Jake made before he went home to the Midlands.
I do honestly want to see him once more. I know I'm old. I'm not getting any younger. I've reached a stage in life I've got to watch every... And I don't think I will get any better after this year. I don't think I will be able to do it another year. So let's have it this year. So it'll be a final memoriam to Joe and me.
But, as we said, that second reunion was not to be. Jake's heart condition worsened, and just a few months after he found Jonas, Jake Mason died peacefully in hospital. Pat Murphy kept contact with the wandering Jonas, who, by the time of Jake's death, had tramped thousands of kilometres across the Australian continent to Queensland.
I received a call to tell me that Joe was still in Tully, in fact, and the owner of the property where he was camping at the time had been told of the forthcoming programme and had taken Joe into his home to enable him to watch it, and then the man had put a call through to UK, to Jake, and this enabled Joe to tell him himself that he was well, he was okay, and also, of course, that how happy he'd been to see the programme that took him back to the places where he'd spent his childhood years, the place that he'd left 47 years ago, and of course to see Jake's family, who he'd never seen before. So, in a way, in an indirect way, Jake had got his wish for that second reunion.
Although the two brothers were never to see each other again, the bond reforged in that shanty near Perth was to remain unbroken right to the very end.
Lloyd Bridges was more famous in the water than on land. But his long-running TV series, Sea Hunt, left him with wondrous stories of dolphins, like the ones that act as midwives for women who give birth underwater.
The dolphin would bring the baby up after it was given birth to.
An untold story. Next time.
Lloyd Bridges, one of the nicest men in Hollywood. Next time. Also coming up, the remarkable story of a recurring dream that haunted a woman for 10 years and only ended with the chilling discovery of one of the greatest crimes of the century. For now, good night. See you in the future.
It's too coincidental to have those dreams for that period of time, and then all of a sudden you find that you lived in a house, and at the time I lived in that house 17 years ago, there were 7 bodies already underneath the floorboards.